Welcome to the Geek 101 Podcast, episode 225. Top 10 Scary Movies. Horror films don't create fear, they release it. I'm Ariel.
And I'm Andy Bowman.
And today we are going to go through the Geek 101 official top 10 scary movies. We're going to talk about horror movies a little bit, maybe what qualifies. But first we have a big piece of news based off of one of the most popular threads that's popped on Twitter that I've seen in a long, long time. Andy, can you tell us what happened on Twitter?
Okay, so Game of Thrones showrunners Benioff and Weiss really set some relationships on fire.
Oh yeah. So for those of you who did not hear, they were recently in a panel at I think an Austin Film Festival, and the gist of the panel went like this: they essentially had no idea what they were doing going into Game of Thrones. They were given multiple chances to get the pilot right. They were ordered by executives to add material. They went on fan sites to find castings. They refused to hire certain people based on their producer status. Essentially, Benioff and Weiss, the showrunners for Game of Thrones, were largely unqualified and to create a show of the magnitude, and it was up to certain other members of the production team, as well as apparently the actors who helped embody and evolve the roles they played. It was up to them to kind of create what and how Game of Thrones was going to be successful from its initial season. Your thoughts, Andy?
Okay, so first thing was every chance they took, everything that they had the opportunity to, they just made it worse for themselves. There are so many better ways to have said what they said.
Yes. And so here's the thing. It came out afterwards that they were no longer going to have their crazy Star Wars deal, Benioff and Weiss. And so here's the issue with, like you said, it's not that they said that they were inexperienced and they didn't know what they were doing. It's the complete lack of self-awareness in them saying it from this incredible place of privilege. And it's funny because one of the Game of Thrones spin-offs, which is helmed by, I think, I don't know if it's just women, but definitely people of color, which is it would mostly star them. It's produced by them, right? They were given a chance to do a pilot, and the pilot was not picked up. And from Benioff and Weiss's account in that panel, they were like, yeah, HBO gave us, a bunch of chances because we were so bad and we don't know how we ended up getting the jobs that we did.
We conned HBO.
Yeah, basically.
So another thing that they say is they pretty much say, oh, for us, it was like a really expensive film school, which, you know what? They could have said, during the first couple seasons, we were in really over our head. It was a crash course in film learning. But instead, they are summing up the entire 10 years, which apparently they really stress that they gave up 10 years of their life.
That's what they say. They gave up 10 years of their life. That's crazy.
Next, I really want to stress that apparently they let the actors, as they put it, rearrange the rooms in the house for the characters. Everything that they said, it was said with a feeling of contempt for the audience, right? They said, oh, well, we didn't have fantasy elements because we wanted this to appeal to... cut that out. They don't want us to have any fantasy elements because we want it to appeal to, football players and moms.
Yeah. And if they had come out and said it this way, that when we started Game of Thrones, we were not good at this. and we were given chances by the studio, and it's thanks if the freezing was, it was thanks to the incredible producers and other writers and actors that we were able to make the show as impactful and of such high quality as we were, right? That's a way different way to say, that's a very different way and a much more positive way to say we weren't masterminds behind this. It was an incredible like team effort, but they are so egotistical that it's all about them, right? Where it's just like, yeah, we managed to pull this off even though we didn't know what we were doing. Instead of we were not qualified and somebody saved our bacon.
God, man. Yeah, so it's an interesting read. Go look at it, because I have a feeling that if they're like this in a panel, imagine what they were like in private.
Yeah. Unbelievable. They there's no self-awareness.
Another thing that they said that really, really kind of got me: why did they choose to write all the episodes by themselves? Because we didn't know better. No, you knew better because you had the opportunity the first few seasons. The first few seasons were good. You let it get to your freaking head.
Right. And their attitude and the circumstance with which they were able to do this speaks on the incredible level of like boys club that still exists in Hollywood today. If you look at Benioff and Weiss's past like film record, right? There is no way that if you had just decided to look at their resume that you would allow them to create such a premiere show. Their movies include writing for Troy, which was an endeavor, but not quite, not well written. He wrote X-Men Origins Wolverine. He wrote Gemini Man. And it's like, those are all not good scripts. And you're trusting this guy to do it. And for what? And it's because he was born to a rich family, or he's a Goldman Sachs. He has Goldman Sachs connections. So like Goldman Sachs is one of those crazy investment bank companies. So basically he bought his way into the industry, and he bought his way onto Game of Thrones. And somehow, some way, the people that managed to get themselves onto this project saved it from the showrunners.
Right. And another one where, this is not a quote, so this is just the thread, that Dan doesn't see the value of considering other people's reactions.
Yeah, but it's crazy because like they can go out and just get other people's input when they feel that it benefits them. It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah. And if this is the case, I wonder how bad Colin Trevorrow and Trask were. It's not Trask. Who's the guy who directed Fantastic Four?
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Trank.
Yeah.
Trank.
Like I really have to wonder. I also wonder if maybe Disney kind of told them that they weren't getting the Star Wars project and they were drunk here. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is. I'm glad that they're off of Star Wars. It is frustrating because, like, it became very clear through Game of Thrones, and that the people in charge did not understand what they had. And I don't think they really ever did at this point. There's probably somebody out there on that team who did understand what they had. But I'm glad that they are losing their projects, because they don't I'm speaking very plainly here. They don't deserve to have good projects because they're not talented filmmakers. Apparently some people have said Brian Cogman is the guy who's one of the producers who is and one of the writers for Game of Thrones, that he might have been one of the guys that is like most responsible for making this way better than it ended up being. Or I mean, but then it could have been, rather.
Right. Well, anyway, let's go on, because this was just a fascinating look at how success can go to the heads of creators, and maybe just give us a little bit of an explanation about what the heck happened.
Yeah. So we're moving on to the next one.
Yeah. I don't have anything more to say.
No.
It was interesting, but
Yeah, let's move on. HBO Max recently came out with a bunch of with a huge news drop of the content it's going to have on its streaming service HBO Max, and but they also announced that they're going to have original series, if I'm not mistaken, Andy.
yes,
And
they did.
we have confirmation for two of them. The first one is Adam Strange, which is a which you
Well,
will
this is actually going to be DC's Strange Adventures. It's like a set of like sci-fi cosmic, stories.
okay.
It does have Adam Strange in it. I really don't know much about it. It's it started in the Silver Age. It's there.
All right. But the other one, the bigger piece of news, the more high profile one, is that they are looking at doing a Green Lantern original series featuring not Hal Jordan, who we've seen attempted multiple times, most recently with Ryan Reynolds, but for Jon Stewart.
Yes.
So for those of you who don't know, Earth has multiple Green Lanterns. The one that we are most often exposed to is Hal Jordan, the pilot. Jon Stewart, who you might know from the Justice League cartoon, is a former Marine and architect who ends up being the Green Lantern after a stint where Hal Jordan was unable to fulfill his duties.
Now, is that what he did after the Daily Show?
Yeah, that's what he did after the Daily Show. So he did the Daily Show, then became a Green Lantern, and then now he advocates for the 9/11 guys. That's Jon Stewart's career arc. No, but traditionally Jon Stewart is portrayed as a I don't want to use uptight, but let's say clean shaven, prim and proper military man, which is a far cry from the Maverick-esque high flyer that Hal Jordan is.
Right. I mean, I'm certainly much more familiar with Jon Stewart just based on, the Justice League cartoon, because that was our Green Lantern.
Yeah, for sure. I loved the Green Lantern, and I loved the concept of Green Lantern growing up, so I read a lot of Hal Jordan comic books. But many people grew up with Jon Stewart as their Green Lantern. So, anything else in regards to that piece of news before we move on to our main topic?
Yeah, just really quick. A few other of their original series. One is by co-creator of the television show Atlanta, Hiro Murai, who's doing a something called Station 11 based on the New York Times bestseller, which is a sci-fi show, it looks like.
Okay. Anything else?
And Denai Guerra.
I don't know how to say that. Guerreri.
Right. Well, apparently she is also doing a show based on a book called Americana, starring Lupita Nyong'o.
Oh yes, that I heard of as well. We do know that HBO Max is going to cost like $15, and that's a lot. And so some people are really questioning, is it worth $15 when Disney Plus is $7? So interesting.
Yeah, they also did not do a great job of releasing this news. I was actually watching it as it was being retweeted constantly, and they duplicated a ton of tweets.
Oh boy, not great.
Also a Gremlins animated series from Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment.
I'm okay if we stop with the
what
the
you're not excited about the reboot of a movie?
No.
Okay, well that's it. Let's get into the real thing today, Ariel. Let's get into the meat of this conversation.
Oh yeah, so we are going to discuss we pulled a bunch of our listeners. We got decent feedback here, but we pulled a bunch of them, and we're going to talk about everyone's top 10, and we use the phrase scary movies. But before we do that, why don't we just take a look introspectively? What is your relationship with scary movies and horror movies, Andy?
Okay, so this is one of the things where I really didn't start getting into scary movies until a little bit later in my life, until early college, because I jump very easily. So I've been, over the past few years, really just catching up on, I guess, past decade now. Wow. I watched The Thing for the first time 10 years ago. I watched Alien for the first time 13 years ago, but yeah. Psycho, The Shining. These are all movies that are relatively fresh in my mind. I really love horror stories. I just couldn't do movies. Like, give me a H.P. Lovecraft or a Edgar Allan Poe. I really like atmospheric and mystery stories. So this is interesting.
Okay. For me, I was kind of traumatized when I was, a little kid by certain family members watching horror movies while I was in the room, while I was in the house. Way, way, way too young to be watching such things. But I still ended up, watching with friends. It's more of a social thing for me to watch horror movies. Looking back at my list, I'm not the biggest fan of traditional horror movies. I find that most of them lack something, whether it be good acting, good plotting, good writing. Most of the writing in horror movies is atrocious. And so as someone who likes to create stories and to write, if your plotting and your writing don't make sense, I'm just not going to enjoy it. And so even a great like horror film to me will just not be interesting if at least the classics, right? The classics were, oh, look at this young couple in the woods having sex. They're gonna die. Like, what movie am I talking about, Andy? You can't tell because
what?
it's...
Yes, I can. You're talking about Black Panther.
But you know what I mean. But
yeah. There's a lot of morality tales and overuse of tropes in horror movies.
Yeah, classic. I think the more modern horror movies are the ones that are the best because they're taking those tropes and they're staying away from them, or they're inspecting them, and they are creating really great art off of that. So,
also, the budget for horror is much lower, so this is where a lot of really interesting filmmakers get their start.
Yeah.
And with today's technology, they can do these indie movies much quicker and without as much studio interference. So we're getting a lot more interesting films today.
Yeah, and there's a certain level of competence and pacing that you need to have as a director of a horror movie. So you can tell when a good horror director transfers over to something more mainstream, that a lot of times there's a certain level of competence behind it. Other times, not so much. But I think you look at someone like Jordan Peele and even Shyamalan, in terms of let's just use his directing and not his script writing, which is atrocious, as aforementioned. But they started off in horror and they end up having really successful careers. Even like Spielberg, Jaws is his first big blockbuster. That, I think, is a horror film.
Jaws is the first big blockbuster.
Right. Okay, but let's get into our... Andy, did you want to go through our personal list first, or should we go through the big list?
I think we should probably go through the big list first, talk about these movies, and then kind of just run down our own personal top 10s.
Sure. All right, so let's go from 10 to 1.
Okay.
Number 10. So this is a combination of assessing points to films that were very often cited in lists. So number 10 is a film that I haven't seen through and through, and that is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Yeah, so I haven't fully seen Psycho. After a certain point, I never felt the need. I'm not a big cinema guy. I'm not a big film watcher. I love stories, and I know what happens in the story, so it's difficult for me to go back and watch this movie.
Okay, well, let me tell you a little about Psycho, because it's really good. Like, a lot of these movies are movies that, you kind of think you know what they're about, and then you watch them, you're like, oh wow, that thing that got popular into the, the zeitgeist, That's only a small part of the film. Psycho is really good, really tense. Unfortunately, I think it made Hitchcock be known as more of a horror director instead of, a noir kind of director. But then the last 20 minutes come out, and due to the context of the day and age, they had to basically have somebody explain it to the audience.
Interesting. So we all know the famous scene with the shower and what's the actress's name that you first see? Jeez.
Rihanna, Marion Crane.
No, Janet Leigh as Marion Crane. So you do see, like, everybody recognizes the scene. Everybody knows the name Norman Bates, and at this point, many people know the twist. But it is regarded as one of the most recognizable, most famous, and most impactful films ever.
Yeah. It also gave us Anthony Perkins' son, who is a wonderful horror director in his own right. But that's another thing. Anthony Perkins is the guy who played Norman Bates, Psycho.
Oh, okay. His son is... Who's his son?
Oz Perkins.
Oz Perkins. Oz Perkins is director of such films as... I don't know. Gretel and Hansel. He's
The Black Coat's Daughter. I Am
Black
the
Coat's
Pretty
Daughter.
Thing That Lives in the House.
Okay. Yeah, very gothic type thing.
Yeah. He's a very slow horror director.
Yeah, interesting. So AFI has mentioned Psycho many, many times. In the top 100 movies, it's listed number 18. In thrillers or thrills, it's number 1. In villains, heroes and villains, Norman Bates is number 2 as a villain. He has quotes, scores, anything. It is just one of the most famous and impactful movies, and it shows it here on a list primarily featuring just like geeky people. It still makes it as one of the more traditional slasher horror movies.
That's right. Moving on to number 9. And Ariel, you got to act surprised like you don't have the list in front of you. We have The Descent.
The Descent. The Descent is, if we're looking at my list, I think it's the only traditional horror movie I have. Let's say American horror movie I have on the list. What are your thoughts on The Descent, Andy? Or you said you've never seen it, correct?
Correct. I know everything that happens, and I don't need jump scares in a claustrophobic cave system.
Yeah, so that's basically what it is, right? A hiking group gets lost in or in a cave, in a spelunking cave, because they decided to go into the cave, into one that hasn't been fully mapped out yet, which is stupid thing to do. It's incredibly claustrophobic. It's frightening beyond all measure. I've only seen it once, and I'll probably never watch it again.
Some theorize that this is actually a crossover movie with Lord of the Rings.
Is it they're all just golems?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. But let's move on. The Descent is one of those films that like many people really, really enjoy, but again, don't watch
Ariel,
more than once.
Have you seen the director's newest movie?
No, who's the director in this?
The director goes by the name of Neil Marshall, and he directed this movie this year called Hellboy.
Oh yeah. No thanks. I've seen. Yeah, no.
Wait, he's also directing a movie. Called Skull Island: Blood of the Kong. I do not know if this is in the King Kong verse.
It's got to be. Well, no, King Kong is public domain, so
yeah,
doesn't have to.
Anyway, let's go on to the next movie.
Sure, the next movie we have on our list is one of my least favorite movies I've ever had the displeasure of watching in a theater, and that is the 2015 film The Witch.
The Vitch.
The Vitch, double V. What do you think of The Witch, Andy? Is it on your list?
It is nowhere near my list, and there's a good reason for that.
Go on.
I haven't seen it.
Like if I had known what type of horror movie this was going to be, I wouldn't have watched it. I I watched with my three friends, and we walked out, and we were just like, "Man, we're not highbrow enough for this." I I hated it. I wasn't frightened in the slightest. I wasn't interested in the slightest. It is quite this, comes in at number 8 here. But I have a lot of friends who really really enjoy this movie, and they're film lovers. And admittedly, again, I am not.
Right. Ariel, are you interested in seeing John Eggers' new movie, The Lighthouse?
That's a movie that I will probably wait until it's on VOD or something.
Okay.
But I am interested. I like Willem Dafoe. I'll watch most things he's in.
Right. And just remember, listeners, this was not on any of our lists, and it made it to number 8.
Yeah, Andy, why don't you give us number 7?
Okay, number 7. I am shocked that this movie is so low on this list. Considered by many to be one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. Alien.
Yeah, so Alien didn't make my list because I think I watched it when I was too old. And I can certainly find the value in it. But horror movies to me, since I don't, horror movies to me are so nostalgic unless they are like absolutely like brilliant satirical pieces, which we'll get into later. I absolutely see the value in it. I absolutely consider it one of the best horror movies I've seen. It's really effective. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Alien? If I'm not mistaken, Andy, this is your number 1.
Yeah, I didn't really put my horror films in any specific order, but yes, Alien is a movie that I really love. I think it's perfectly paced. I think that the set design is amazing, and just the design of the creature in general is amazing, and that Sigourney Weaver is flawless in her representation of keep wanting to say Ridley Scott of Ellen Ripley, and it's a movie that I think is better with multiple viewings.
Yeah, so I probably missed it. It was probably recent. I want to watch this in a theater, like in a movie theater. I think it would be incredible.
It was. This is the 40th anniversary.
Yeah, so I missed it, but there are so many great things about this film. The design, the H.R. Geiger design for the xenomorph, for the eggs, for the ship, for the face hugger. If I'm not mistaken, Ridley Scott had made it so that the chestburster scene was unbeknownst to everyone in that scene, and those reactions are quite genuine. The surprise, the fear.
Yes, that is what I've heard. There is a documentary on the making of this movie that really dives into H.R. Geiger called Memory Origin of Alien. I believe this was my homework a few weeks ago.
Yeah. I haven't seen it yet. Life's been kicking me in the face lately. But the more I think about Alien, the more I like, the more I kind of fondly remember how much of like a masterpiece it is. This is a strange comparison, but it's not this one, but like Predator, or something. The simplicity behind films like John Wick and The Raid, where it's like, hey, let's take a very simple premise and let's just make it as brilliant as we possibly can, at the best version of the simple premise that we possibly can, and that's what Alien is.
Yeah, hopefully John Wick and The Raid won't get run into the ground like the Alien franchise.
For sure. I think the Alien poster is, one, incredibly effective, and two, is in contention for the best tagline ever. In space, no one can hear you scream.
Yeah. I think that might be one of the most famous taglines, right next to Jaws.
What was Jaws?
Just when you thought it was safe to go into the water.
Right. I think Superman's.
Wait, I need to look this up now. I think that might be Jaws 2.
I think Superman's is very good. It'll make you believe a man can fly. Like in the 70s or whatever. Or the Jaws tagline is "You'll never go in the water again," which is not as great.
No, but just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water. I mean, that clearly has to be the sequel.
Yeah. So good. But the Superman one, you'll believe a man can fly. Like for the 70s, that's an awesome tagline. Like for the 70s and what you get in the movie and stuff like that. Um, that's another good one. But yeah, the alien one is perfect. In space, no one can hear you scream. So good. And what makes Alien so successful, and another film that we'll get to later that's much higher on the list, two films actually. In Alien, everyone does everything right. They do the smart things to survive, and you know what? They're still dying, right? They're just still in danger, and I think that two of the top three films in our list also follow that. Four actually of the top four, three of the top four. And that's what makes Alien like be able to stand the test of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I think adds to the general love for this movie and the rewatchability is things like Ian Holmes, who plays a, spoiler alert for a 40-year-old movie, an android. His performance is done so well because none of the crew knows he's an android. I mean, the character they might have read the script. I don't know if it was kept in like the chestburster scene, but the actor is playing a guy who's trying to nail human, but can't quite do it. So it's really, really, really good. Everyone should rewatch it. Yeah, because I'm assuming you watched it.
Andy, can you give us the next film on our list, number 6?
Okay, number 6 is a film that is a bit of a surprise that's on the list, but it's an amazing film nonetheless. Number 6 is Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, Shaun of the Dead is a film that I watched when I was a teenager, 14, 15, when it came out. And it's immediately one of those movies that I was like, that's one of the best movies I've ever seen. And it's probably in like my top 20. It's brilliant. It's hilarious. It's funny. It's charming. It's emotional. But Andy, there was a special circumstance regarding Shaun of the Dead, right? If I'm not mistaken, on our list.
This is the only film on this list that got in because both me and Ariel voted for it.
Yeah. So, yeah. I think in another world, this movie isn't on the list because it may not qualify. Zombie movies in and of themselves, some people tend to put an asterisk on them in regards to horror movies. And so, satirical horror comedies, might not be everyone's cup of tea, but certainly it is for us.
Now, Ariel, for me, this movie has actually one of the scariest moments of all time for me. That will never be able to be replicated. But when I first watched this film, I was just starting to get into movies, and I put it in my laptop, and I'm sitting on my bed watching it, and the scene where all the zombies first start showing up, and you hear the low moan.
Mm-hmm.
Power to my house goes out.
Oh no.
And here's the thing about my laptop at that point in time. If there was no power, there was no screen.
Right, so the movie just cuts.
The movie did not cut. The movie kept playing.
Oh.
The sound of the zombies kept going. But there was no light.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Let me share a quick story with you. I might have told this on the podcast, but who knows? We were playing. I was in my basement which was my room. I was in my room with my cousin and my uncle, and we booted up the GameCube and we're playing Resident Evil 4. I had never played it up until this point. And so we're in like the village in like the very first scene, and I'm in a house and I'm shooting at the townspeople trying to come attack me. And the guy with the chainsaw is trying to come in, and I like lock the door and I go upstairs and I shoot at them from the top. And I turn around after a minute or two to get more ammo, and the guy with the chainsaw is in the house, freaks the crap out of me and chops my head off with a chainsaw. I'm so frightened. Me and my cousin, we scream. I throw the GameCube controller up in the air. I shut the GameCube off, and I never touched the game again. So to this day, I've never gotten past the first stage of Resident Evil 4. It was one of my most fond memories. Um, so let's move on to number 5, a veritable classic, the source material by a master, the film by a master, and that is Stanley Kubrick's version of Stephen King's The Shining. Andy,
Yeah.
what is your relationship with The Shining?
It is a movie where me and my friends did a double feature that night. We watched another movie on the list we'll talk about later. And I was so tired by the time that The Shining came on that I fell asleep and woke up at the very last part where there's just a ton of quick cuts and flashes, and it was the most terrifying and confusing thing because that one dude in the bear costume.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I watched it again, and I really enjoyed it. It did not make my list though, so this was really interesting that it got up there.
Yeah, a lot of people really love The Shining. I didn't watch it till I was an adult. I didn't read it till I was an adult. I don't have an attachment to it. And the older a film is, the harder it is for me to find a lot of value in it. I'm not a film critic. I'm
and
not
you
a big
are also a zoomer.
Yeah, I'm a zoomer. I'm not a big I appreciate older movies, but ones where the pacing is hard for me to get into. Just lately, anyway. But I understand the value in it. I understand the intensity, the horror, the uneasiness that the film likes to convey. I understand the pedestal that people put people like Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick on, despite the fact that they are a bit of at odds on this film. So definitely worthy of a top 10 spot on this list.
By the way, The Shining gave us the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror parody, which is one of the best episodes of Treehouse of Horror. So it's on YouTube. You guys should check it out. Anyway, this is where all these were almost unanimous. So be prepared, people. If you wrote into us, these were probably on your list. A movie that I think is absolutely amazing, Cabin in the Woods.
Cabin in the Woods is my number 1. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I think it's one of the best pieces of satire I've ever seen. I don't read a lot of satire. I don't watch a lot of satire. So take that with a grain of salt. But you watch something like The Boys, which tries to talk about capitalism and tries to talk about the superhero industry, tries to talk about all that stuff. That's like kindergarten level compared to what Cabin in the Woods does for horror films. It's brilliant. It's frightening at times. It's hilarious. Bradley Whitworth is hilarious in it. Chris Hemsworth is in it. This is a Drew Goddard film, and I ended up liking a lot of what he makes. He was probably one of the driving voices behind Daredevil. Bradley Whitford, yeah, is the character I was thinking of. But yeah, you get an early Hemsworth performance. You get a bunch of other stuff. What are your thoughts on Cabin in the Woods, Andy?
I think it's brilliant. If you have not watched it, go watch it and watch it as blind as possible. I don't know how that is in this day and age. It is a horror movie for people who do not like horror movies.
Or for people who love horror movies.
Oh, absolutely. This Joss Whedon's script is very funny. And it has one of the most intense scenes that involves making out with an animal that I have ever seen. Ariel, would you agree that scene is very tense?
Sure. Yeah.
A stuffed animal, people, by the way.
The film is really it's hard to talk about it. I don't want to spoil it. If you love horror movies and you haven't seen this, if you don't like horror movies and you've always wanted to find one that maybe fits the bill, this is it. If you're just like, yeah, horror movies are fine, you'll watch this and you'll think horror movies are fine. But the way that the film plays out, the way that the story plays out, the way it's executed, it is undoubtedly my number one horror movie.
Okay. Next up on our beautiful list, this is another almost unanimous vote. The movie Get Out.
Yeah, so we mentioned earlier with Alien that what makes it so scary is that people do the right things in the film. In both Cabin in the Woods and Get Out, and you know, our number one film, right? The characters in it are doing all the right things, and still it's quite an effective horror movie, and there's a credit to it. Jordan Peele, this is his coming out party. It's one of the best film debuts I've ever seen in my life. It's the most recent film on my list, and I think the most recent film on most people's list. I think Us, if that made your list, was also another one. But yeah, Get Out also managed to kick off like a horror kick that is currently like a good horror movie kick that is currently still in play in the US right now.
Right. And Get Out also did a few other things that it really bumped up Blumhouse's money, you know,
and cred.
Right. Blumhouse it really makes a lot of money in just funding a ton of very small budget films, and if one hits it out of the park, they make way more money. It's a very smart way to create lots of movies, especially if you're the type of person or who enjoys letting letting creators create things. Get Out definitely has Jordan Peele's fingerprints and feels all over it. It has an amazing performance by Lakeith Stanfield.
And by Daniel Kaluuya.
Yeah. But I really love Lakeith Stanfield.
Mm-hmm.
And his performance is more funny and less until it's not funny.
Right.
So Ariel, you say that these characters here do nothing wrong. Are you maybe suggesting, and hear me out here, that there could be something like these characters were in a system that they couldn't get out of? You know, that there was this entire system built into the very culture of where they find themselves that really makes it difficult for them to make any right choices.
Yeah, so the odds are against them, even if they do everything right. They would have to maybe work twice as hard to get half the credit. To borrow a certain phrase. I think the characters in this movie, I think they're very smart. I think they are very competent, and I think the film plays out in a really great way to reward the audience in watching them through that. I love this movie. I've only seen it once, and it made such an impact. This is not a movie that like I'm afraid to watch again, like The Descent. I'm gonna watch it again. It came out so recently that I just haven't had the chance to yet.
All right. So there actually was a tie for first and second place.
Okay.
Just letting it out there, because one of these films was actually not on my list, my personal list. I'm thinking that should probably get first place instead, because we weighted it such that the kings of this geek royalty kingdom and the patrons had slightly more of a say, not much more.
Sure. Yeah. So what's our number 2?
Our number 2 is John Carpenter's The Thing.
So The Thing, it made your list, yes?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. It did not make mine.
Mm-hmm.
Did not make mine. I didn't watch this film until I was an adult, right? Very, very recently, a couple of years ago, in fact. But it's still really effective. The practical effects are amazing, and it's another one of those films where Kurt Russell's character is just doing all the smart things, and yet the thing is terrorizing the entirety of the film.
Yeah, yeah. The thing is terrifying, and apparently, if you know Swedish, you can actually get the entire movie spoiled for you.
Yeah, I found that out. That's an interesting thing. Yeah, that was interesting. But the cultural impact of this movie, I think, is bigger than any other movie on this list except maybe Psycho.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe Alien. I don't know. I would put it up with Alien.
I also think that there is so much in Alien, so much that people draw from Alien. They also draw from things like Predator and Terminator, which were all at the same time. So those things get lumped together, where the thing is so unique.
Yeah, the thing is really unique. It is a remake, so there is that.
It is?
Yes, John Carpenter's The Thing is a remake of a 1950s movie called The Thing from Outer Space.
Thing from Another World. Huh.
Oh, Another World, not Outer Space, yeah. Which
Interesting.
is itself an adaptation of a short story, apparently.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, and then there's, of course, the 2011 prequel to the film.
Prequel / remake.
Prequel remake, yeah. It's essentially the same type of thing. But either way, the film is incredible. Worth a watch, definitely, if you haven't seen it. Any of these films, I think, except for The Witch, I can't put my stamp of approval on that. Any of these films are definitely worth a watch. So for our number one, okay, this movie was number 3 on my list. Andy, what number was this for you?
It did not make my list.
Oh, it did not? All right. But this film it's frightening, it's well made, and despite being part of a tired genre, still managed to top the list, as well as be really impactful to fans of both the genre and non-fans of the genre, and that is 28 Days Later. Yeah, Andy, why do you hate the best movie on our list?
Well, you see, Ariel, it did not make my list because actually the same reason you didn't put The Thing up there. I watched it much, much too late to really appreciate the cultural moment. Zombies had been in the culture for so very long, and I was just kind of tired and kind of knew all the tropes.
Did you watch this after The Walking Dead had been released on TV?
Oh, yes.
There you go. I think that's a huge, huge piece of impact into how you view this film. Okay. So this movie definitely has the pedigree for a top film of a list. Danny Boyle, director of such films as Slumdog Millionaire and 127 Hours and Sunshine, is the director. Alex Garland, who was the director for such films as Ex Machina, the writer of the film Dread, and director of Annihilation, was the writer for 28 Days Later.
And some say that he was the director for Dread.
Okay.
There are rumors about that.
Interesting. That he was...
Well, it was a Bryan Singer in Bohemian Rhapsody situation.
Right. Okay. That doesn't make sense. Okay. I could see that. And the cast includes Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harris, Christopher Eccleston, and Brendan Gleeson.
And they're all fantastic.
They're all so good in it. But like you mentioned, Andy, if you're watching this after watching The Walking Dead, and let's say even 10 years after it's released from 2002, I can definitely see it not being as impactful.
Yeah. I believe this also might have made a very big... It came out the same year as the Walking Dead comic started.
Okay. 2002? I don't know when the Walking Dead came out comic, but interesting.
Yeah. So, this is just a weird thing. It's a very good movie. The opening scene is very famous, and I really wish I hadn't, been so into film that this was, on every top whatever list, or, YouTube video, so I knew all about the opening scene.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. There's a couple of really great moments in the film. Couple of interesting ways that they talk about like in a post-apocalyptic zombie place. Um, it's frightening in several different ways. Uh, the zombie quote unquote outbreak makes sense as much as you can have it make sense. It's just so it's like it's airtight and it's hard to find anything wrong with the movie.
Right, and it has Doctor Who in it.
Yeah, Chris Eccleston has my favorite Doctor. It has Brendan Gleeson, who's an amazing actor.
Wait, we agree on that?
What?
Christopher Eccleston's the best Doctor?
Oh, he's the best.
Yeah, okay, cool.
He's the only one who took it seriously, I think, of the last 5 Doctors. And he is. This is a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
I think that version of the Doctor, before that Christmas special with where all the Doctors reunited, I think that version of the Doctor is the most interesting. We'll get into it maybe off air, or on a pod. Who knows?
I think it's a good conversation. Hot takes.
Yeah. Because that's certainly not a popular take in regards to. But enough about Doctor Who. 28 Days Later is just so well made and so frightening and so memorable that I'm not surprised that it clocks out a number 1 on our list.
All right, guys. Ariel, let's just really quickly kind of go over the films in our top 10 personal lists. And
Sure.
I've got a few honorable mentions that kind of either made a splash or left an impression on me when I saw them. So,
Okay, why don't you give us your top 10 from
okay.
10 to 1?
Most of these are going to be movies that you should see as blind as possible. I am a fan of unique and different stories, and oftentimes horror movies are actually able to have twists that aren't spoiled by the trailers. So I just want to get that out of the way right now. All right, I have a film called Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
Okay, give me a 1-sentence synopsis of it.
Okay. A documentary film crew decides to take an opportunity to follow around the new upcoming slasher king. So imagine if a documentary crew got to follow Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger or Jason.
Interesting.
It is very funny.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good to hear. All right. I've never seen it, and we will definitely tweet these out and post these on the Facebook and stuff like that, so people can watch. What else do you have, Andy?
Okay, I have a movie called Resolution. I really can't say too much without spoiling it, but a guy takes his best friend who's addicted to meth to a cabin in the woods so that he can kind of, kidnap him and force him to, get off the meth.
Detox.
Yes, detox. There we go. It is a slow burn and very creepy, and it has really made an impression on me.
All right. You're number 8.
Well, number 8 was Get Out.
Okay, just mentioned it. What's next?
All right. So next up, It Follows. This was a very popular choice.
Yeah, I've seen it. I enjoyed it. Didn't quite make the impact. I think I watched it a little too late. By a little too late, I mean like 2 months too late. Or it's just like, this is amazing. One of the best horror movies. And I feel like if I had gone into it with 0 expectations, I'd probably come out with higher praise on it.
Okay. After that is a movie with a terrible name. So, excuse me, but you should definitely type this into Netflix. Pontypool.
Give me a 1-sentence rundown of Pontypool.
It is a Canadian movie about zombies where a radio shock jock is stuck at a radio station.
Speaking of, have you ever seen Tusk?
No, actually, I have not.
It's absolutely absurd and definitely worth a watch. I'm not going to say it's good, but it's definitely worth a watch, especially for you, Andy. I think you'd find some value in it.
Okay. Next up, we then have Trick or Treat, the Michael Dougherty anthology horror movie. It's a Halloween-themed anthology movie by the guy who gave us Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and Krampus. It's fun.
Okay, go on.
After that is American Werewolf in London.
I figure this is there for a pretty singular reason.
I just really liked it.
Yeah, most people like it simply for the incredible transformation scene.
Oh, absolutely. But it's also just a very good slow burn movie, and it just has a sense of creepiness that I really enjoyed.
Sure. What number and what's next?
I got 3 left. Cabin in the Woods, Alien, and a movie called Spring.
What is Spring? It's
Okay.
quite impactful for you to be your number one, I'm sure.
Yes, I still think about this. This is more of a romantic movie than a horror movie. If anybody has watched any of the Before trilogy directed by Linklater, it's very much like this, but it's also a monster movie, and something is wrong. Directed by the same team that did Resolution, so you have to watch it blind. It's a good watch. It's on Amazon Prime.
All right. So I'm going to call an audible for number 10. I used to have Zombieland, but thinking about Alien makes me really appreciate it. I'm going to stick it there at number 10. I have Peter Jackson's The Frighteners as my number 9. The Frighteners follows a character played by Michael J. Fox as a young man who can see ghosts. And so what is happening is there's something seriously wrong with the ghosts in the town. It seems that the ghosts are afraid of something and a house is haunted. And so it's one of my favorite movies to... it's not one of my favorite movies. It's one of my favorite movies to remember me watching as a kid. That's why it's in my top 10.
Okay.
Number 8,
It's
I have
fun.
this. Yeah. Oh, it's really fun. It's really, really fun. It's got Michael J. Fox. It's got which I don't remember which guy. Oh, Jake Busey in it as a mass murderer.
Right.
So
I mean, it's kind of like a grown-up version of Casper, the old live-action movie.
yeah, very similar. Yeah, that's a good example. Number 8, I have The Descent, which I'll never watch again. Number 7, I have Shaun of the Dead, which is only this low because it's a scary movie list and not a favorites movies list.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Pan's Labyrinth, I have at number 6. It's that movie is certainly not a traditional horror movie, but it's definitely not just a fantasy movie, right? There's monsters, there's death, there's horror, and there's scary moments. So I felt comfortable putting it there. Number 5, I have Get Out. Number 4, I have a film that was remade in America to diminishing returns, of course, and that is called Shudder, which is originally a Thailand film. The Thailand version is incredibly more frightening. Asian cinema is good at horror. It's one of the few things that America does not have a monopoly on great film. It's horror movies can be found all over the world, which is great because my number 3 is 28 Days Later from England. Number 2 is one of my favorite movie moments of all time. Number 2 is a film called Dead Snow, which it follows a bunch of hikers taking a trip to a cabin in Europe, and they end up coming across an army of zombified Nazis. I'm gonna spoil it because odds are you're not gonna watch it, but I still think it's hilarious and still worth watching. The film, for the first 30 minutes to 35 minutes, let's say, is a straight horror film. Okay. There's a specific scene in Andy, I think you know what I'm talking about, where the film just subtly transforms into an incredible comedy. It's brilliant. It's one of my favorite moments I've ever experienced watching movies. It was me and my cousin and one of my friends. We were sitting in his we were kids. We were sitting in his parents' house in the living room because there was no school that day, and we're watching this movie. It was one of the most pleasant surprises I've ever had in my life. My number one is Cabin in the Woods. So three of my top four are non-US, which is interesting, and five of my top six. So that's our top 10. Any honorable mentions, Andy, that you'd like to just touch on here?
Yeah. So I got to get this out of the way, because if all the listeners had band together and picked which version of this movie that they liked more, this would have been on the list, and that is Evil Dead.
We had a few.
We had a lot of Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2, and Evil Dead 2013.
Interesting. I think what puts a lot of value in horror movies is characters, and I'd like for us to start taking polls on like favorite characters. I think that's a really interesting discussion.
Oh, so is that going to be our next month's poll?
Yeah, you know what? Maybe we can do that, because I think none of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are particularly like hold up really well. I don't think any of them hold up great. But I think that character is amazing, and I think that character is really, really impactful in a way that even Michael Myers, or like, of course, but I mean Freddy Krueger, but like Michael Myers and Jason and Pinhead and all of these guys, like Freddy Krueger is a way more interesting character than any of those.
All right. And it gave us the amazing Scary Terry from Rick and Morty.
I want to say his tagline, but this is a PG podcast, and we should not. But yeah, interesting. I think it, this most recent it in 2017 or whatever year that was, chapter 1, that made more lists than I thought it would make.
Yeah. It made a lot of lists. Just kind of going through here, Creep, which is a great movie on Netflix, made a few lists. Classics like Rosemary's Baby, which, as my wife said, the real monster is the director. Any of the slasher classics made it up there. A great Iranian horror movie called Under the Shadow, which is also on Netflix, made it up. And some of you decided to put Midsummer up on your list. And it was a very, very good movie, but I worry about you mentally.
Yeah, it's no surprise when movies made the top of our list and The Thing and 28 Days Later. Nobody put this on their list, but I think if somebody wanted to, they could have put Jurassic Park, and it would have been like one of the best movies on the list.
Still afraid to go in tall grass because of The Lost World.
Yeah. I'm afraid to go into hotel kitchens because of Jurassic Park 1.
Interesting.
No.
And also, listener, the one who put four Paranormal Activity movies, I worry about you too. I love you, listener, whoever you are, but you put 4 Paranormal Activity movies.
My aunt gave me her list, and I didn't include it because it was literally 5. It was 5 Nightmare on Elm Street movies and 5 Halloween movies. And she was like, "These are the only horror movies I've ever seen." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm not putting it on the list then."
Yeah. I also do want to give a shout out to some of the amazing, Troll 2 was fun. Sleepaway Camp, some of the bad movies that people really love. Those are always fun to talk about. And of course, Coraline. And I think that'll wrap up my honorable mentions, because those were the ones that got enough votes to make a dent.
Yeah. I'm not surprised judging by our listenership, but Scream didn't even come close to our top 10. And I think if we polled 100 people, 200 people, and they gave us answers, I think Scream definitely makes the list.
Well, and I think for Scream, you have to have seen it at the right time.
You have to have seen it when it came out.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I mean, Scream is awesome. but all the tropes and stuff are very we're done later. You know, if you've seen Cabin in the Woods or one of my movies, you'll never guess which one. You know, if you've seen those first, it kind of ruins it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Andy. I think that's all we got here for today. Next week, are we doing Terminator Dark Fate?
Okay. Next week I have a special surprise for everybody.
Okay.
We are doing Terminator Dark Fate, but also I've never seen T2.
Oh, you've never seen it?
Nope. So
Wow.
I will be watching T2 as well. I will be watching the 4K, Blu-ray rip that just came out, or I guess came out like a year and a half ago, and I bought and never opened. So yes, we will. I hope, Ariel, you're okay with talking about both of these movies.
Oh, for sure. I think T2. I'm gonna rewatch it now that you haven't. We'll have a great discussion on T2. I'm fascinated that you haven't seen it yet.
Well, what's another interesting fact? I've seen all the other Terminators.
So you've seen 3 and Genesis and all that?
Yep, 3, Salvation, Genesis.
Oh my god.
1.
All right, we'll talk about the Terminator franchise next week. I'm cautiously interested in Dark Fate, so we'll see how that turns out. What's the other film that's out right now?
I mean, Jojo Rabbit.
No, hold on.
Maleficent? Do you want to go see Maleficent, Ariel?
No, absolutely not. Oh, Doctor Sleep.
Oh yeah, Dr. Sleep.
So
we should definitely. I don't think that's gone wide yet. I don't think that goes wide until next week.
You're right. That is not wide yet. So we'll definitely do Dark Fate, and perhaps we have a conversation about Doctor Sleep and The Shining after that. Okay. That's it. That's our list. I think this was a really good discussion. But before we get out of here, Andy, what is your homework?
Okay, my homework, because I have been on an anime kick lately. On Crunchyroll, there is a show called Made in Abyss. It is about 2 very cute children going down a very dark hole that is like a literal hole in the world. It is not happy.
Okay.
It's very much done the contrast of how cute the main characters are with how out of the depths and dangerous this world that they are exploring is.
All right. What's it called?
Made in Abyss.
Made in Abyss. All right. If you're interested in that, make sure to check it out. My homework this week is a little out of place, but also quite appropriate. This book is the scariest book I've ever read in my life. George Orwell's 1984. It's scary in a much different way than anything we've talked about today, but it is certainly the most frightened I've ever been coming off of a book.
You're one of those.
Oh, I read it for the first time very recently. That's why it's so frightening.
Yeah. Also, just go ahead and put a plug in for an amazing book that Ariel wouldn't stop tweeting about, so I bought it.
Yes. Perfect.
Movies and Other Things by Shea Serrano.
Did you get it? Did you start reading it?
Yes, dude, it's great.
It's amazing. It's absolutely bonkers. That book. It's so ridiculous.
A collection of essays that is done in question-answer format, asking such great questions as, would this movie be better, worse, or the same if it had The Rock in it instead? And you're putting way too much thought into this. Or what is the best tough guy movie dog owner?
Yeah. I think we should do an episode on that and hopefully get in Shea Serrano's good graces.
Dude, absolutely. Let's start tweeting him and try to get him on the show.
Sure, yeah. All right, that's all we got for this week, Andy. Next week, the Terminator franchise, since you have somehow not seen Terminator 2. So, Andy, where can people find you online?
Okay, people can find me online on Twitter at Hebrews Paleo.
All right, you can find me at Dread Pirate Rada. You can find us at Geek 101 Podcast on Twitter and Facebook and Patreon. Email us geek101pod@gmail.com. That's all we have for today. Class dismissed.